Okay, right. These are the final 5 questions in this section. And they're basically a number of lease arrangements that we're dealing with. So first of all, we have this, again, I think these are good questions for practice. You can see what's going on here. We have a right of use asset here, because you control the thing and you will use it almost exclusively, or exclusively if you like. So the first question is a straight one. When we're talking about the right of use asset, the asset itself, what do we include? Well, first of all, we actually start off including the initial measurement of the lease liability, because you have the right of use asset and the lease liability, right? Debit asset, credit liability. So that goes in straight away. And then, of course, we agree that any other direct costs to do with the purchase of this lease are allowed to be capitalized, because we're going to be amortizing this over the long term. And any lease payments made immediately or before. So any sort of deductions, if you like, almost credit the asset and debit the lease liability. So any major lease payments made initially can also be deducted. So the purchase price of the asset is not included here. And it's driven by the liability itself, the lease liability. So the answer here is C. This is the one that would not be included, if you like, in there, because that we're basing it on the liability itself, right? Because we're doing it's almost like a matching concept. Yes. Okay, great. Now this question says, well, the sneaky here, but I'm sure you got it, but if you missed it, it's because you just didn't complete the process. Anyway, the non-current lease liability here. So again, what you have here is this. You're starting off. They're telling you the present value here. So this is what the loan is, right? When I accrue this over a period of time, I will end up paying the final value of this lease. But I'm starting off with this, if you like. I'm going to do a double entry just for, it's the table. Doesn't really matter how you do it, actually. Doesn't matter really. Whether you say, well, listen, I'm starting off with this loan of 2.3 million. I fully recognize I have that, so that's your liability. Of course, you accrue 10%, 230,000, and it's saying you intend to pay off at the end of the year 725. Exactly. I mean, it is your classic amortization of every liability. So the question is, what is your carry down figure? So your carry down figure after that first year will be, at the end of that first year, is 1.805000. So you have here 253,000, 253,000. So your brought down is 180,500. So it's tempting to just want to straight away say, well, that's your answer. But remember, their classification requires us to break this up into the current and the non-current. So what you have to do is you need to do one more round of this to sort of find out what the current liability is, or what is payable within a year. And what is payable within a year would be the fact that interest will accrue on this at 10%. So we will have, again, just doing my double entry, if I carried that on, interest will accrue here. So I'll have 180,500, and I will pay off my standard 725,000. And now the question here is, what is that carry down? I guess I could look at it from, well, I'll just, you're paying off quite a bit, aren't you? It really is these two things. 725 minus 180 ultimately is the current. But let's just do it. Let's complete this. So my carry down figure is this plus this minus this, isn't it? So I have 1805000 plus 180,500 minus 725,000. So I have brought down 1.26,500,000. So that's brought down. So basically I have 1805, and then I have 000, and I have 1,260,500. So it's the difference between these two that is current, and therefore, well, basically this is the non-current bit, because the bit in between is current. And this is what I now actually owe over greater than 1 year, and then the difference is what I owe over 1 year. So the 1805 is made up of two parts, this bit and the current bit, which is what will happen during the year, which is, of course, subtracting the two, 1805000, and that's 544,500. Right? So that's the current bit. You could have been asked that. So your answer here is 1,260,500. Right, okay. And then this next bit was this bit here, and we talked about this. Remember that for kind of assets less than a certain amount, like little tablets and phones, we don't apply the right of use. We can just treat them like operational leases and just treat them like just expense them. So debit, expense, credit, bank. So here we have 7,000. It's about the dates because you're accruing. You have first and just treating it under normal accrual system. 1st of July, so it's 6 months of the year. This is 7,500 paid annually. So the first year, of course, 6 months will be 7,500 divided by 2, 3, 750. So your answer there is 3,750 because you're dealing with it on an accrual basis, just as you would any normal expense. And that's what we're saying because you've taken the exemption here. Right of use. So here, this is the last one. I've talked about it a few times. The fact here is that you sell this thing. It's a perfectly normal sale. No one's complaining. But then you release it. As in, when I say you release it, you lease it again. Now, it's worth 5 million, and you've now basically reintroduced a portion of that worth. The question is, what should we continue to recognize? And so a simple way of looking at it is simply saying, well, if this is the value that you brought back in, well, basically you should therefore recognize, if you like, 4.5 million as a proportion of what the real full value is, times the carrying amount. So times 3.5. And when you do this, I mean, this is really what you're saying. You're sort of saying, and this is a fast way to do it. I do this long video on the real issue here of what's happening with double entry, but this is a nice straightforward way of looking at it, of saying 4.5 divided by 5 times 3.5. It literally is just saying, what is the portion? That's the value you're taking back in. What percentage? These are just full, like, think of these as current values. You're reintroducing 4.5 and as a proportion of 5 million. But that's the carrying amount. So we want to recognize things at their carrying amount, so to speak. But so you technically haven't sold, in a way, sort of saying you haven't sold this asset fully. What proportion, or you're sold a portion. So what proportion have you sold? You can say I've sold 0.5 million as a proportion of 5 million. So it's saying you haven't sold 4.5 million as a proportion of 5 million. So what proportion is that? That's 4.5 over 5 times 3.5. And that comes to 3.15. 3.15 million. And that's how you deal with that. Yeah. And then the final question here says that if it hadn't, so this is if it wasn't a sale, it's an important bit here. If it wasn't a sale, it's the kind of thing I'll probably hark on again at revision. If it wasn't a sale, then you recognize a liability and you continue to recognize it at its existing carrying amount. So please pull me up or send me an email on this particular one if this is something you. But there's a long-winded version I do where I calculate literally all the profits and then calculate based on what proportion of profits you cannot recognize and can recognize, and I go through the full double entry, but that's sufficient. Really, this is a sufficient way of looking at it. Okay, great stuff, and the answers here were C and D, and that brings us to the end of section A.